Welcome, everybody, to the first edition of the ID podcast. I'm here with Peter Murray and Jeremy Cantor. Just a little bit of an explanation. So this podcast is really targeted towards compliance professionals and, professionals in the gaming industry right now. So what we're going to talk about is a little bit of everything: regulation, innovation, and disruption. First and foremost, how the industry can be improved, what things are very actual right now, what's the news. This ID podcast is brought to you by ID Now. ID Now ourselves a disruptor in the space, doing all things document verification. My name is Roger, working at ID Now, and essentially, bringing this to you to, make, content a little bit more fun in the gaming space, as it tends to be almost always white papers or blogs. So, welcome. I've got with me today two people. So, as I said before, Peter Murray. Peter is a true Geordie, but living now in Spain, actually. He's got over 13 years experience in the gaming industry, worked for different, technology providers, and is now a consultant. We've also got here Jeremy Cantor, and Jeremy is a true veteran in the gaming industry with over 15 years of experience. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yep. No, thank you. Just like to point out before we start, I'm getting old, but it's not quite 30 years experience yet, but I've been around a bit, absolutely.
Okay, right. Okay, so, I guess the first question is, and obviously everyone's asking it right now, is the regulation fit for purpose in Europe? Or let's stay in Europe first, and then we might go over the pond.
Well, I'll take that one first. I guess it's like a lot of things in our life at the moment. It's way too simplified a question to actually answer a simple yes or no. I think there's certain aspects of regulation that are good, and there's certain aspects that are a little bit out of sync with the way, certainly in the areas we deal in, we're around data, technology, and innovation. I think that's always going to be a struggle. So I guess there's no simple answer, and I guess we can then delve into various parts. But at the moment, I guess the simple answer to that would be, it is where it is, but it needs to adapt and evolve with customer expectations and the industry in general.
Regulation is often a mirror of the status of the industry, but it's also always playing catch up. So regulation is a very good mirror of what the state of the industry is today and how it needs also to be improved, to be through innovation and through disruption. So I think it's a very good way to enter in the topic of our discussion.
Okay, so I guess you said obviously mirrors the industry. So what do you think right now is being or is good, and maybe things that have to be improved in the future when we talk about mirrors and the regulation?
Well, the industry is becoming mainstream. Becoming mainstream means you become regulated, you become known, you become under the obligation of following certain rules because you are a mass market and you are a mass adoption also from the customer base. And so this is a good thing. This is a good sign. This is healthy. Of course, this has some impacts like market consolidations, because not every company in the industry can afford regulation. Regulation has a cost. Regulation has a moral and corporate obligation for those companies. And at the end of the day, there is a trend of consolidation as an effect from this. So this is regulation is a healthy sign of the state of the industry. It's also a message of the challenges to come, because if we look at the major topics around regulation today in Europe, in UK, in Sweden, in Spain now as well, underage gaming is becoming one of the hot topic to ensure that underage population has no access to the betting, to the gaming activity.
But do you think when we talk obviously digital, that you can really stop that from happening? Is there going to be 100% a feature where we say we're going to stop underage gambling?
Well, regulation is here to set the guidance, the direction, and to set the landscape and for the innovation and technology companies to go. You don't have the means, find the means, work on that. You don't have the technology today to do it, fair enough, do it manually. Yeah. And then that will accelerate the process of innovation.
I agree. I think the exact question is, will you stop it 100%? The answer is simply no. There's never going to be, there never will be a silver bullet. But that's the goal we set ourselves, and we should set ourselves. I think the challenge around regulation is that it evolves and ebbs and flows with the industry in general. So I think Jeremy's point's absolutely right. If we'd gone back a few years, it might have been fraud. We come to where we are now. It's around harm minimization. And for me, that's all wrapped up in KYC, a true picture of knowing your customer. But it just moves with the issues that go with the industry. And at the moment, the nature of the industry we're in, the toxicity around the product that we're providing, quite rightly, that focus comes around putting that customer at the front and center of your operation, whether you're a supplier, an operator, a platform, and harm minimization. So protecting miners and just making sure we're doing everything we can to try and pick up flags and monitors of harm, and then protect customers in there. So I think regulation just moves, and that's the challenge. I think if you work within a regulator, is you've come in and you might be concentrating on one thing. How do you know, and how have you understood the challenges that come with the sector? You know, are we suggesting that a regulator in any jurisdiction suddenly is an expert on harm minimization, or was on fraud, or is on AI? So look, I'm not particularly sticking up for the regulators at this point, but they have a difficult challenge. They need to adapt like the industry does for those challenges that come with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also, I guess, another point is the regulators have a very hard job, because essentially there is regulations or different regulations, sometimes even within countries, right? So you have an example in Germany that's totally crazy. You have different regulations within the country itself. And then obviously, I guess, coming back to the point that you said, Jeremy, with regulation, being affordable, I guess sometimes, companies, struggle sometimes with that, because you see, okay, the UK has a different regulation to, an example, Netherlands, or Netherlands is different to Sweden, and is different to Spain. So do you think maybe the regulators would have to, at some point in the future, come together really as I know it would be very hard to do, but, come together as a consortium maybe, and really set those standards very, very high for everyone?
This is a very political question, and actually Germany is a very good example, because regulation is not only the mirror actually of the state of the industry, is also the mirror of the state of the political forces and the political will that is in place. So your question refers to a lot of the political will in the European Union. But before that, if we take the example of Germany and we look at why is this this blockade in Germany, this conflict between different jurisdictions, the Schleswig-Holstein jurisdiction and regulation framework, the federal, hopefully, maybe for certain people, regulation framework. Why are those things so messy, so conflicting? First and foremost, it is a matter of political will. It's a matter that there are, I don't know how many lenders in Germany?
16.
16, meaning 16 different local governments with local team of regulating and IT people for the local lottery. And talking about one federal regulation means putting 16 or 15 government teams to unemployment. This is something that is absolutely not wished by the country. It's wished by the industry. How do we help them deal with that? How do we bring the reality of the industrial relationship and the industrial ecosystem in the gaming world with the means of technology from today, with the server-based activities that can be based in the other places of the European Union? And Germany is facing a lot of dilemma, I'm French, and questions around how to deal with Maltese regulated operators, how to deal with Schleswig-Holstein being one local German regulation, and how to deal with innovation, allowing the control of those activities, allowing the blocking maybe of those activities. Today, innovation allows them only to block payments.
I would describe, I think it's about politics and money. You know, I've spent a lot of time as the US have been regulating the last 3 or 4 years, and that mirrors very much what you're seeing in Germany. But if we go back 10 years, where it was .com, and a lot of operators uprooted and went to whether it be Gibraltar or Isle of Man to be tax efficient. And that's gradually over that time, it's become .country. So whether that's .co, .uk, .it, .de, whatever that might be. And that's the same in the US. So the US is regulating because it wants the tax dollar that goes with that. So the start of the question, which is should they be more aligned, is absolutely they should be more aligned. Are they going to do it? Absolutely not. There's no political will at this point, even though within the European Commission there's conversations, there's lobby groups, etc., that are trying to push that around at things like identity. But I think the chances, even though, again, technically they're all governed by the money laundering directives, the chances of Germany aligning with Denmark, aligning with the UK are very slim. And then within Germany, you've got the different territories that go with it. So the interesting point you made there was the industry wants it, but does the country want it?
Well, I think an interesting connection to the origin question that you had is regulation fit for purpose? Regulation is definitely fit for purpose today in the aspect that it is trying to ensure a fairer aspect of the industry, a fairer access to the industry to the consumers. And they are protecting the consumers from harm, but also they are encouraging fairness for the consumer. And this adds to the question that, yes, the industry wants it. Yes, the consumer needs this alignment. Are the countries remembering that this is the principle behind regulation?
But I think interesting that the other C word outside of collaboration is consumer. And what does the consumer want? Because I doubt very much that a German consumer just wants to be labelled in Germany, or a British one can't do this forever. And I think back to my politics and money statement, the industry is a global industry. Yeah. So if you're an operator, you've got real challenges around the various different regulations that are in place and that are coming, but your customer's pretty global and they're going to be travelling around the world, and they want less friction, not more. Which again, one of the biggest challenges for a regulator is going to be, that challenge between AML regulation and GDPR. One wants more data, one wants less, and a regulator's got to try and pull that all together and make sense of it in one country and then in another country.
But at the end, they want a fairer price, and they want the same good odds on their sports betting activities that they could get
absolutely
in UK until it's part of the EU. And we're not talking about
Don't
Brexit
mention the
today.
B word. No B word. Yeah, go.
Breakfast. They want the same odds that are being configured from the same servers where they are accessing their betting site, but just because of local obstacles.
I agree. And I think the interesting thing, if you take, say, the Dutch and the Germans that are coming to it, it's almost like they're trying to reinvent the wheel. So whether it be identity or product or where your servers are, there seems to be very little collaboration. You should be able to pick up a template now for a general discussion around bringing gambling into your jurisdiction and tweak it a little bit. Whether you regard Denmark as good and France as bad, the fact is there's good signposts to good regulation. But it's almost like they want to seem to start again to impose their own version of whatever that is. And that's just, it elongates the process, it makes it more complicated for everybody, that's every stakeholder in the industry. And I think that's one of the challenges, that if they're not talking together and collaborating, it's just regulation takes longer, players are less protected, tax revenue is going to the grey market or the black market. But we could talk about this all day. I guess the challenge is how you get them to do that in such a politicalised environment, which is I'm from one jurisdiction, I want to do it my way.
I mean, I guess, and at this stage, I mean, obviously, people talk always, very critically of regulators, but you have to say that, an example, the UKGC or an example, the MGA, I think they do fantastic work trying to make it fair to everybody, not only the consumer, also the operators. And I think when we talk an example about Germany, which is obviously a very hot topic now with all the changes coming in next year, in February, that there's going to be even more friction with video identification. Which, if you think about it, you're going away from, let's say, a simple document check, and you have to be on your phone and do a FaceTime call with someone who's going to prove your age, identity, and whatsoever. So I guess, and obviously coming back to that.
Well, can I just pick up on that, because I think that's a really interesting point on probably for me the most important subject in town, which is KYC, and the challenges of what I would consider, say, the UK relying on something that's been going for 10 years and hasn't adapted. So if the German market is coming with the starting point of using the data and the technology that's in there, facial recognition, biometrics, documents, all the stuff that even banks that should be slow and cumbersome are starting to go down that route, then that's really interesting, because you get other jurisdictions where they're a little bit nervous and wary of the new technology. They would rather rely and go almost backwards to a system that says, I've got to find you on a CRA database. And now for me personally, that's a system I see disappearing in the next, that way and commercial model and everything else. But it's interesting that they're starting to go, right, well, let's use that technology that's already there. And for me, that's a good thing, but I don't know how that then resonates across the rest of the industry. And certainly if you're an operator trying to pull all these parts together, then they're sat there going, well, it's costly, it's complex, there's a lack of guidance on it. But at least I guess in that scenario, it's starting with the technology that's already out there.
And this is where the European Union regulation and set of rules and laws can be helpful, because you have so striking opposite situations in different countries. Take the bank ID in Sweden, central system of identification through the banks, and in France, for example, the how do you say, the absence of identification through the actually no right to centralize the information, because the CNIL, the French Center for National Information and Liberties, do not allow cross-sharing of data and cross-sharing of information between systems. That's even more than GDPR.
I think that absolutely one of the critical points of this. And if you look at the challenges around the UK GAMSTOP project, it's all around identity. But we're in a country in the UK here that has consistently refused centralised ID cards, which is something the populace doesn't want. Well, that creates a real challenge for people around identifying and understanding. So some of the negative publicity around the GAMSTOP was all around, the ability to change details and the ability for verification. So the regulator is trying to do the right thing. The provider of the services and the processes are right, but the challenge is there just isn't that centralised database. So you're absolutely right on the Scandinavian aspect, which is the banks are the trusted entity, and you can go to that and verify that it is Peter Murray, and you're in and you're off. And that for me is one of those stepping stones, and we might talk around identity later. But that's the point, is everyone's different. Every country are happy to give their information to the government. So here in the UK, we don't want that. It might be that the biggest supermarket has more data on me than the government. But, giving it to the government, maybe not. If you're, whether it's Sweden or nowhere, you're quite happy going, there you go, there's my identity. I trust the government or the bank or whatever that trusted entity is, that'll allow me to go and open accounts and get stuff delivered.
Yeah, I think the whole data thing, especially around governments, I think it sits a little bit wrong with people when the government owns all the data. But essentially, well, I mean, the data is with all the, if it's with a UK supermarket or if it's with a, UK, fitness club or whatever, they've, as you said.
This is where we are touching a very sensitive area, because you're talking about data owned and processed by the government, and by gambling companies. I mean, you're adding the cherry on top of the cake.
It's around trust, isn't it? We're entering into an area of trust and sustainability in many ways. So that absolutely good point is so OpenID was launched, the ability to get into your bank account. Would you give that to a gambling company? For the majority of people, the answer is probably not. And you might for something else you considered trustworthy. So the industry has an issue around, I think you mentioned the word toxicity. Absolutely, we've got a perception problem out there. Some of it's completely our own fault, some of it isn't. But that bit of that identity and understanding who I am, would I give that all to a gambling company? Then we have our issues trying to centralize what that is, I think.
I mean, I think, you see some of the, examples that you see throughout the world that, you can essentially choose what data you're going to share with people. An example in form of there is some data encrypted within the national ID. And obviously going forward, I think, essentially, if we would, and I'm going to put this out there, what would, let's say, people do if there would be, let's say, like a blockchain, right? So you as a person, you have verified data that is on your profile. And then when it comes to that, you log into it and you share, data that you want with, an example, a company. Not necessarily like a gambling provider, but would that be something that would go into the right direction where essentially the people take control of their data and then really start sharing it? Would that take away friction in the future? And obviously, again, blockchain is such a huge kind of topic. We could talk about hours, but do you think that could be one kind of solution where it could go?
If you put yourself in the position of the consumer itself, it's actually very schizophrenic, because on one hand, the consumer doesn't trust necessarily each and every type of organization, maybe not the government, especially not the gambling, and sometimes not innovative technologies or protocols like blockchain. And this is what leads to strengthening the trust into the legacy stakeholders, into the legacy organizations. I don't know, the land-based casinos, the lottery shops, and or the pub or whatever that would be able to identify you physically, and you're there, and you're not giving your identity to some technology that. But on the other hand, the consumer today is extremely used and comfortable giving all of its information to Apple, Google, Facebook, or whatever marketplace. Sorry for naming companies. And this is what I call the schizophrenia between we don't trust technology and the usual suspects of government and the casinos, but we do trust that company that powers our telephone.
Whether we should or not. Absolutely. I think the interesting thing is you've hit on a point that I think in a couple of years' time will look very different. I absolutely believe that power of identity is moving away from the commercial organizations, and it will eventually end up with the individual, where you are verified once, use many. So a bit like the .gov.verify process here in the UK now, which hasn't worked out well, but that principle of getting yourself verified to a government level and then choosing what information you go out there.
It's so like an e-passport almost.
Absolutely. So if I want to order my shopping from supermarket A, I release a certain amount of data. None of it is private information they can get. It all says that's enough data that Peter Murray can buy shopping. You then do the same whether you want to hire a car, and you do the same whether you're getting a mortgage, opening a bank account, or in our instance, gambling, and you will set that. The challenge for the industry is how we then integrate that in, because there's lots of stuff to do. But I firmly believe that's where we'll end up, because that's what the consumer will want. The power for us to operate our daily lives sits within our smartphone. And so from that, we release certain aspects that says, that's enough, I'll have my shopping delivered, or you know what, I'm going on to gambling company A because I want to open an account.
So do we exclude the minority of players that wish to remain anonymous?
Well, you know what, I think, but that's like talking about crypto and everything. The anonymity is the problem. So there'll always be a question that if you want to remain anonymous, why would you want to do that? And everything I can see in regulation says that that's the bit they won't step over. That how do you? You will have verified, in my scenario, you will have verified enough that you are Peter Murray, you are that person, says, and then you use that for various things. The opening up of a new identity, a new account, whatever it may be, that's going to have its challenges if you want to remain anonymous. But if you've opened that account, you just have to release the fact that I am over 18 or over 21 in the US, and I'm verified to open up a gambling account. So I think anonymity is a real challenge for anybody, and you just take the examples of cryptocurrencies as well with that.
I think within this kind of topic and with anything else, I don't think there is a one-fits-all solution. I think it will always be a hybrid between manual and technology, because essentially, at the end of the day, some things they have to be done by a human that has to do maybe a second check, and obviously going forward that will be the same. So which I guess brings us to one step further, which is the technology that obviously plays a huge part in supporting that regulation and making lives easier for operators. Obviously we're in a time now where you probably find there is about 300, 400 different technology providers that obviously are selling a solution that might want to help. Or might help essentially the operator. What do you think in terms of the technology providers? Do you think they are doing enough to ensure that it's going into the right direction? Do you think they are actively trying to help with the regulation, or do you think it's still a little bit almost too commercial and this kind of part of education is not there yet?
We cannot blame it for being too commercial. It is too commercial, but it's fair game. What it is not enough, basically, is putting itself in the shoes of the industry and deeper into the consumer journey, because this is what it is all about. It's the consumer journey and the flags that are raised along its journey to identify either harm potential or even marketing opportunities. And the technology companies that are today on the market are each and every one extremely good at their own expertise. They are not as good as showing how they are inserting themselves within this supply chain, I would say, within the concrete experience of the journey. Some are very good at being the black box that will compile the information. Some are very good at some insights and decision making on some precise topic. And the industry, neither the regulator, didn't yet identify that holistic mapping of roles and responsibilities along the consumer journey. How to protect and how to improve the life of the consumer in the gaming industry.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you look at the biggest topic here in the UK at the moment, which is harm minimisation and player protection, it's okay for the regulators they did to charge the industry with using better data and better technology, and raise the bar for harm minimizing. But what does that mean? And if you're an operator, you don't know. So over the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen an absolute arms race from the suppliers out there to try and find a solution. Well, simply there isn't one. But some people will go further down that line than others. But there isn't an answer. So if you're an operator and you're going, well, I've got my data and I've got the data from the suppliers and the vendors that are out there, nobody knows what the answer is. So there is no, I think the valid point is there's no one single thing that's ever going to do that. I guess you're never going to expect the 300 odd suppliers to it's a commercial entity, they want to make money. But somehow we've got to create a shared environment, whether that's led by a self-exclusion conversation or whether it's harm minimization is great. So we had about 6 months ago, 4 or 5 big operators launched their own version of player protections. Yeah, all great, all done with the best of intentions, none of them linked up. Yeah, how does that help? What might be right for company A and revenue stream A might be very different from company B and revenue stream B. So somehow we've got to encourage an environment that if you were in financial services or you were in insurance, you're used to sharing data. Yeah? And don't let's use GDPR as a sort of excuse for doing that. This is for the best of the industry. So who leads that conversation, I think, falls under regulators to challenge it and create that environment where they can do it, and operators to corral their supplier base and see how they can do that. But I think the central core of it is data sharing and how we collaborate at every level.
And this is reflecting on the lack of cooperation or between the industry stakeholders, not just the technology providers, on how they insert themselves within this game and the ecosystem, because the industry stakeholders take the operators or the platform providers or both when they are playing the same roles two roles at the same time, still didn't decide on whether to do things in-house or to outsource it to make it more complicated. So today you have the regulator that doesn't have a clear understanding on how important it is to grasp this role of mediator, basically, of the ecosystem, and not just setting the rules and giving the guidances. You have the stakeholders of the industry, the core stakeholders, operators, platform providers, etc., that are still hesitating between in-house, outsourced, full platform, we can do everything by ourselves, or we might need a little bit of integration with some third-party providers. And you have the third-party providers that are also, some of them, dreaming of taking the role and space of everyone that we cited just before. So it is still a mess and showing the lack of maturity of the industry compared to the fintech or the finance industry more.
I think that the phrase used there was, can the regulator be the mediator of the sector? It's never going to be, or it's very unlikely to be, the suppliers that are, because they're after a commercial edge. And that's also the challenge I'd put on the operators. You know, is safer gambling or a really great system to protect the customer a competitive edge? Well, that some might think it is, but it shouldn't be. This has to be the sustainability of the sector, bearing in mind all the challenges we've got. If this key issue could be something where at least we pull together on, and I'm definitely seeing signs of it. There's definitely conversation. Yes, it's driven by big fines and eye-watering amounts of money that are being taken. But we're starting to see things around that. And I think whether it's an event, that's where they've had one in, I think it was in Malta last week, or the upcoming ones. But is that regulator? Who's going to pull that? Who's going to, make sure that the industry does this stuff? I don't know the answer to that. It probably is the regulator. But somebody's got to do it.
And industry bodies, and industry trade bodies, and voluntarily organizing themselves into tackling and progressing. Yeah. This is something that is being progressing and evolving in the industry. I think it does give hope.
I think then it does self-regulation work, which is a sort of separate topic, and we can only do so much. I think the challenge around self-regulation in our sector is just the perception of the industry out there. I don't think anybody's going to either thank us or credit us for doing anything positive, but that's not a reason not to do it. So absolutely. the cynicism and comments that are out there around, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? I think we've got to be on much more of our front foot, bring positivity to the sector, because we're not going to get any credit regardless. So let's do the right thing, work out what it is. So it's got to be more evidence-based than what we have at the moment. But take that and get some positivity. And I don't just think it's when the fun stops. It's got to be much deeper than that. And the industry pulling together. So for me, that area of collaboration on let's get an understanding of what the problem and the solutions are, and then take that message out there is just the only way forward.
So there is actually an interesting question that we got before the podcast, and the question reads, do the regulators have enough understanding of the gaming business? How dangerous is it for us to have regulators with no experience in gambling setting the rules? Do we see countries with regulators that have experience? Are these valid questions?
Well, sound a valid question to me. I think what are regulators? As a general rule, they're either public servants or government bodies. Yeah. So can we really expect them to understand, whether it be the technology, they should definitely understand the industry. And the challenge, if you're a big regulator with a high turnover of staff, no names, no pack drill, then that's always going to be a challenge. Yeah. But, is it a worry? Absolutely, it's a worry if they don't understand the sector. And I've worked in some that didn't understand the internet, never mind the sector. Let's just say it wasn't EU. But the fact is, you want your regulator to do, but we have to be, in my opinion, aware of the limitations that's always going to bring with it. So back to my get on the front foot, go and demonstrate. I spend a lot of time with regulators demonstrating some of the technology that's out there. You know what, they didn't understand it, but maybe they shouldn't have been expected to. We've got to be positive on that front and go and demonstrate, and that there's something they've got to regulate.
But I think, then again, when you say that, the regulators, they don't get the technology, but if they don't get the technology, so how does it work in order to make it an efficient way for the whole industry to essentially, be available, be protective of their customers, and to make it work really? I mean,
I think, if you don't mind, Peter, I think there is one advantage, at least, that we can say, in maybe not understanding the technology, but let's say more not being proactively focused on the technology, is that the regulator becomes then focused on the principles, regardless of the means. And this is also a good thing, because that opens the door for competition and innovation in the technology sector to provide a solution that will respond to the requirement designed by this principle. And this is good. But this is also what makes the debate between principle-based regulation in places like UK or regulations with strict guidances and requirements in places like France or
prescriptive.
Exactly. Thank you.
It's all right. Your French is so much better than my English.
Très bien. I mean, talking obviously about the regulation, about the regulators, and obviously where the whole industry is going. So, do you think a KYC, as we know, is dead?
So my view is it's no longer fit for purpose. I mean, you asked that about regulators earlier. But that's only, I don't know about your opinion on this, Jeremy, but where we are now and what we're using is definitely not fit for purpose. That old school, I found you on a CRA database, that's enough to get us up and running. Not just when both technology and data has moved on, and more importantly, the consumer has moved on, that level of friction of having to put this all in and then hoping it hits a database. Now, that probably, we mentioned with Germany, is if they're going to take their regulation and involve new technology, that's fine. But as we stand, it cannot be right that something we've used 10 years ago is the basis of an industry that's is moved on light years at speed and agility and everything else. So for me, certainly here in the UK, I definitely don't think it's fit for purpose.
And the role of KYC has changed also with the evolution of the industry, because it used to be a tool to prevent or to minimize fraud activities. Today, it is part of the DNA of how you run your business. And being part of the DNA means that this is not even an expense. This becomes a mandatory parameter, a mandatory requirement that needs to be fully and in an optimal way integrated within your business model and with your business operation. And this is something that has not been understood or accepted fully by a majority still of the stakeholders in this industry. And they are missing out because KYC becomes a burden, a cost, when it should be an enabler of the sustainable success and for their growth.
I think if we go back a few years, it was all about onboarding. You didn't care how you did it as long as they ticked that box from a compliance point of view, because that's all you had to do. But this, you've got to remember, this is the most important asset a business has, their customer. And if all you knew is that it was one person, but you don't know what they like, when they like it, who they like to do it with, that's where the real value. And yes, there's always going to be a cost around knowing your customer. But the positivity around truly knowing who that customer is affects everybody. Your ability to engage and deal with a customer on a whole different, the experience you get. And it's interesting seeing some of the roles that are emerging around the industry. Customer experience, that sort of customer journey type role, is being brought in from elsewhere for people who've been challenged around what that customer journey is like. And for me, that's there's a real positivity that the industry is slowly coming around, instead of being a cost and a burden, which it is at this point, to what's the positive? Well, the positive message is I understand you and I can deal with you. So we can look at that from a harm minimization point of view, but we could also look at it from a real positivity about being able to engage in real time with a bespoke message.
And KYC has always been about doing your business right. Knowing your customer was how things were being done in the past, maybe with less effective ways of implementation, but it was about trust, it was about relationship between the merchant, the operator, whatever commerce, and its customer. And this has been lost through the needs of KYC as a mandatory requirement from regulation, and then the confusion around we forgot what KYC is and how we do it. That's how casinos were doing their business. They knew who were their customers. They were bringing them from their house, and so maybe sometimes, of course, there were abuse around it. There were also some holes in the knowledge of the customer, and there was some criminal activities that were allowed even unwillingly by the operator. But today they need to go back at the basics of the principles of know your customer.
And I think it's an interesting, we haven't brought in the land-based side yet, but if you go back 4 or 5 years, knowing your customers, I knew your name, your address, you're over 18, I had your email and your phone number. And that's completely out the window now. Because from their business models is they need to be able to engage better with them. And there's so much more data, there's so much more technology. The challenge is nobody knows how to see the wood from the trees at this point. What does each one mean? And we do tend to concentrate on the negative aspects of player protection, but the positivity side of it is there's just so much more out there. What do we do about it? So how do we replicate that physical process of meeting someone in a casino? And yes, there's some challenges around that. So in the online world, because don't get me wrong, the offline world has it. The challenges that I had when I originally did some work in the States was somebody would walk in with a bag of money and a driver's license, and that was fine. I knew my customer because I walked in. It didn't matter whether the driving license was. I can physically see them, and he's got cash.
Yeah. So just to add in here, and do you sometimes think that regulation is sometimes a lot more harsher on the online world than it is on the offline world?
It certainly seems it. Some of those conversations I was mentioned 4 or 5 years ago in the States were, taking that bag of money and you just hand it over. In an online world, you've probably got a damn good idea of where it's come from, where it's going. That fraud is still a big issue, but there's more touch points and more areas you can see who that person is and what they're doing. So it certainly feels like it, and I think as those two worlds converge and the regulation around them converge, then we need that to be the same for all of them, despite the fact they're different revenue streams.
I don't think that it would be harsher. It's just that sometimes it seems very disconnected from the potential that online can bring into protection of the consumer. And it looks rather at the side of, okay, how to uniform and one size fits all in a regulatory model for land-based and online regardless. And when it could apply a different approach that would even be harsher, maybe, or stricter, not harsh, but stricter, but by making the most out of the technology and out of the potential from the online. And that sounds, when I say it, like some speech about selling the good side of the internet 15 years ago, and we are still talking about that.
Regulation moves quickly.
Today in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we still assume to this day 99% of the people in the world, they're good people. They don't want to do any fraudulent things, and that obviously might play in, and obviously some of the strategies that some of the companies have, essentially the smaller ones, the up and coming ones, that they just assume, oh, we only on board really great people that never done anything bad in their lives before, which might sometimes be right. So talking about those people, I mean, what do you think does self-exclusion play nowadays in KYC? How do we bring this in effectively? Is it working right now? And what do we have to do to make it work even better?
For me, I guess that goes back to where your jurisdiction is. I think that if we just take here and Denmark, Rofus and Gamstop, the challenge they had here, through I guess through nobody's fault, it was around understanding who that was and the technology and the fact that we've had 20 years of this industry and everybody's disparate and the way they take your data is all different in every. So you could have the best system in the world, which, don't get me wrong, it's got its challenges, but then everybody else collects and uses data in a different way. Then there's no centralized ID around it. So the UK's got real challenges on doing that. It's done absolutely with the right intention. But there's also disconnect in whether the regulator's signing it off. So that's one. You then look at Denmark, which you've got centralized ID. You've got a really strong way of doing that. It's a smaller market. It was brought in at the same time. So Holland's also bringing theirs in at the same time as RAREG. So they're starting from a better place. But as an overall it's a part of the toolbox for somebody wanting. We have to accept, and we do accept, that certain aspects of the industry we work in produces harm. So how do we best protect the players? And that, for me, is just one part of it. But it can be done, always be done better. And everybody has a part to play in that, whether you're an operator, a regulator, or a supplier.
I think that the only future way for self-exclusion schemes is through technology and innovation. Because today, putting aside even the problem of lack of data sharing, even if there is data sharing, data is relying today on written and textual information. And I can be Jeremy, I can be Jerry, it depends on the mood of the day. Sometimes I don't remember how I registered on one site and what I wrote. Maybe one day I made a typo and I would never put a Y at the end of my name. I'm IE, but still, I don't know, I might have typed something wrongly. Email, yeah. And no system, even of that data sharing, would be able to pick up those differences. But when you think about technology, visual identification, video identification, photo identification, biometric identification, in addition to all those things, then maybe we are going beyond that very old textual and outdated way of identifying people.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. If you look at here in the UK, where they're trialing some facial recognition in some of the retail shops out there, because their self-exclusion version is obviously and understandably riddled with holes because it relies on people to do that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying technology is 100% the answer, but it's got to be sort of 80, 90% the answer, whereby you can use that identity. So if I want to go from one gambling retail outlet to another, they're not going to know who I am. It's one of the big challenges here. So the ability to tie that in with all the other tools that are out there to understand that it's this person going in is the answer, and that's pulling it all together. But that technology needs to move. I know the casino industry trialed it several times over the last.
The bank industry with the voice recognition for accessing the apps and the transactions, they are trialing it.
Yeah, but I'm going to say on that, I see biometric voice recognition very, very critical, simply because you see those deep fakes and this is no joke. This is like really some serious stuff that has been created, and it's just computer created. It's created within half an hour. Mm-hmm. So for me, I do see the biometric part really, really critical at the moment online, especially online.
In a negative way or a positive way?
In a negative way, because I think, especially I mean, the way I would explain it. So, do you want fraudsters attacking you who spend £20 on their kit, or do you want fraudsters who spend over £2,000? So, and you have to see in relation. Okay, there is maybe 100 million of fraudsters that might just go on a dark web and purchase an ID, or maybe like some of deep fake software for £20. But if you have the right technology in place, you go into other levels. And obviously, don't get me wrong, there'll always be fraudsters. There's always people who are more clever than anyone else and just get ways around it. But I think with kind of that technology, I think it's too early to really bring it in effectively. I think we have to work with layers of technology to make it again. I mean, obviously, it has to be affordable.
You are in a perfect position to be a good client of a principle-based regulation, because the regulation will tell you here, actually, you are absolutely right. Your concerns are absolutely correct and existing and real. And we let you work on finding the right combinations of parameters, of elements, of visual, biometric, or artificial intelligence and questions and things like that, that will be a sort of unique identifier of a person. And whatever way you find and whatever secured way you find to do it, and that you are capable to prove us that this is a unique identification system valid for signing up and signing in systems, but also to self-exclude and create those self-excluded databases, then we are happy. And this is exactly how I would see the role of regulation enabling this innovation in technology. You take the PSD2 regulation in finance, and the objectives around open banking is to enable and strengthen innovation. I'm not saying that everything that I see is looking very progressive behind open banking, but the intention is the right one. Then the regulator should be able to identify the good intentions and the commercial shortcuts that some companies would like to take.
Okay, so here's also a question that we got before the podcast, and it's a very good question. So, is self-regulating ever going to work?
I would start by self-regulating has worked before regulation was put in place in some very in some very specific areas. But look at the chargebacks 15 years ago. 15 years ago, most of the transactions were done by credit or debit cards, and operators in the gambling industry were hugely affected by chargebacks. And the problem was not really to have to lose that money. The problem was that if you are not capable to secure your transactions, well, Visa and MasterCard will decide that you're not a proper company to do business with, and after 1% of dirty transactions, they will close your merchant account and your activity basically with them. And for 1% of bad transactions, you will lose 80% of your business. What did the industry do? They self-regulated. Of course, it was for their own interest of not losing 80% of their business because of 1% of dirty. Yeah. But that's always self-interested, but it is a start, it is a starting point, and it is self-regulation, and it's working. This needs to be enabled, this needs to be helped by the regulators to go further. But when 10 years ago I was presenting to the French Senate, I had exactly that question, and I answered exactly the same response. They were not accepting that the online gambling industry would be even able to try and protect themselves against rogue transactions.
But I think this is very interesting, because when Jeremy says he was talking around the exact same questions that I'm asking now 10 years ago, next question is, how do we enable operators to move on and innovate and disrupt in a way where essentially, I mean, best example is, and I'm just going to drop a name here, is a company called Bitpanda, and they're based in Austria. They're essentially a crypto business, and obviously, as you know, like crypto itself isn't regulated by any means right now. They don't have to do anything, but what Bitpanda have done is they essentially done everything what an example a bank would do. So they self-regulated themselves. But because they were enabled by the Austrian government to do so. So how do we help operators to do that and move on and innovate?
So I guess two parts, just the initial self-regulation thing. I think the answer simple in gambling for self-regulation is no, we can't self-regulate. And that's maybe not, well, it's the toxicity and the perception is now that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But if we just take advertising, where was the restraint around advertising? Where was the self-control that said, you know what, this is coming? There wasn't. There was just this rush to get as much out of there as possible and shout as loud as possible, so tone and content. And where did you think we were going to end up? We were going to end up exactly in the mess we're in now.
The initiatives came from the industry.
Only because it was they
After
knew what
a lot
was
of
coming.
sanctions,
You knew those were coming. The answer is yes, we should do it, and we should do it better than we've done it before. But we would do it in one part, where the fun stopped absolutely nothing with regards to the advertising. And, we can bring in shirts.
The whistle ban that
again,
major companies decided to
and that's
to
great.
apply.
Yep, it's to a certain extent. But again, I think it was just a little too late. So self-regulation is a strong part of what we do. I just think it's also more complicated in what we do just by the perception of the industry we're in. And back to my earlier comment, is just we're regarded very cynically.
So should the regulator, as a mediator, ask for evidence of industry-wide self-regulation without giving the prescriptive way to do it? Is GamStop a way to describe this? Is it it's a prescriptive requirement from the UKGC, but not as GamStop. It can be any other company that offers the model, and it's supposed to be the cooperation between the industry stakeholders. Which direction should we ask for?
Okay, so I think there's two parts to that, I guess. The self-regulation bit, the answer is I don't think we can expect everything from the regulator, and yes, we have to moderate what we're doing, or at least think of the consequences of what we're doing. So it's a two-part thing. The regulator, by nature of who they are and what they do, are never going to provide all the answers. Us as an industry tend to come to things too late and only under pressure for doing it. So I guess you're back to that problem is how do you get that? I certainly see value in the regulator being the moderator. But then again, the question was, is that regulator any good? Back to the conversation we had earlier. I suppose I don't know the answer to that question. I think we could be doing more as a sector, and the regulator probably needs to engage more. Certainly where we are in the moment in the UK, there's a certain disconnect. So all of that, various parts of it pulling together, is probably the only answer to that.
And if we go even beyond our industry, today we witness in UK and all over Europe another industry that is the video gaming industry. Is starting to show signs also of complications because they are targeting underage players. So they are also starting to step on the borders of some things that can be considered as gambling activities. Should they self-regulate? Would we have, I think, any recommendations for them to not repeat the mistakes that our industry maybe have made? Is identity verification maybe a key to this self-regulation?
I think identity verification is not necessarily the key to this. I think, again, I think this industry is a lot further, or it's even a commercially lot bigger than an example, the gambling market, because there's many consoles, there's many different publishers of games, there's really big houses. I mean, let's let's take the example of the famous football game, right? So people go there to essentially buy certain packs to get players, and they are very expensive. So, and it's a great point, right? So, how do we kind of make it or protect people? From this kind of aspect, and where can we learn? Because I don't think self-regulation will work, because I think the industry is just too big, like monetary wise. I think because they've been doing this since 2010. So, and you can buy certain points where you can buy the packs with, and they're like around £80 to £100. So and you see in the newspapers, an example like 13-year-old Matthew from I don't know from Birmingham has bought packs worth of £3,800 on his mother's credit card. So
I think you're back to, I mean, look, we've both got boys who are 10 and girls who are 8, and we've got children, and it's one of the biggest fears we've got. Yeah? But again, back to the perception, gambling's perceived as a bad thing. Video gaming, it's not quite as harmless. It gets 40,000 people turn up at a stadium to watch a couple of people play FIFA. I think they should be wary and look ahead, as we didn't, probably in our sector, at what happened in other ones, and recognise that they should be doing things. But history might tell you they won't, and then they'll get hit with regulation. So as a parent, you're looking at that industry going, whether it be loot boxes, it's what all the things that the kids could get addicted to on there are replicated from what we see in our sector as well. So I think they're going to have the same challenges, but they're probably going to do what we did and let ourselves go down the line before regulation sort of drags them back a bit.
So I've got 2 questions left before we wrap it up. The first one is, so where do you think technology should go right now? Do you think technology providers should work closer with operators to make it again more efficient, more affordable? And going back to the German things here, more efficient. How do you think or what part does the technology providers essentially play this in this whole business?
Well, I think they're clearly a very important part and a big sort of central part of the sector. Because if you're an operator, I think if we go back a few years, operators were telling you they were great with their data when clearly they weren't, or they weren't using it effectively. And they can't be expected to provide anything. I guess the problem if you're an operator or somebody consuming those services, you don't know what's good or not. Yeah. And each one of, and I was in that industry as well, so each one of those will be saying, we're the best, we're better than somebody else, we can give you more. And there's the challenge is, if we accept that there's no one single source that will do that, then how do those get together? And I think as difficult as that is, they need to be joining up, but getting different commercial entities to do that's going to be particularly difficult. So what is that? Who is that? We're all going to sit there and go, right, if we've got that technology.
Back to the political games,
yeah,
essentially.
well, you're going to be, I've got that better technology than they have, and you know what, it might be, but it's not going to solve the problem. That's really difficult. I don't see how you square that circle.
But it's also a political game of power on the business arena, because the technology provider and even more specifically the platform providers in the industry that I'm very familiar with play a role in aggregating, in connecting, in processing, not necessarily controlling the data coming from the operators and the content providers or the technology providers. And today we are seeing basically the evolution and potentially even the disruption of this model by new actors coming in, being the big Silicon Valley e-commerce actors that are present with their marketplace, with their unique way to offer the content to their consumers, to the players, through the marketplace, with the unique identifier coming from Apple is showing a lot of signs of unique identifier that they are going to apply for those social connections or things like that.
And especially now also opening the NFC to essentially read passports. An example.
Exactly. And this is where we need to understand if our debate now is even coming too late, because some other companies and organizations that are yet outside of the gambling industry have decided to implement a different business model, a different distribution model, a different relationship between the consumer, the platform provider, the technology provider, which disrupts completely the role and the responsibilities of each and every one. So maybe this discussion around, is regulation fit for purpose? Is the innovation going to secure and improve the consumer experience? Is the industry able to self-regulate and work together? Might be obsolete in a very short time, because a total different business model where the content provider becomes the B2C operator, basically, because he's working and connecting his product to his consumers through the intermediation of the marketplace, which will completely replace the operator or not, depending on what propelling proposition it has to do it has to bring in the market. Maybe this discussion is obsolete.
Do you know,
that'd be great for this podcast. Very short lifespan.
Do you know what? I think we should sell this podcast because there's so many great business ideas. I think we could end up as absolute tycoons. But look, listen, gentlemen, my last question is, would you come back for a second part?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
that was great.
I mean, look, I thoroughly enjoyed, talking about, all things that we talked about. We touched on regulation, touched on innovation, we touched on, self-exclusion, many different things. And I think we could, today talk probably until 6 p.m. Well, it's
been interesting. I think it was everything sort of come back to regulation at one point. So I think the next one we can make sure we veer to that. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think it's really, it's probably the central tenet of the sector. But there's loads to talk about, Roger. There's so much more that we've had experience in. And clearly we like the sound of our own voices. So I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Yeah, I enjoyed it also a lot, and I think we have definitely a lot to bring more and to see, even to comment on the evolution of those questions, because the industry is evolving so fast. I think we can definitely bring in the US in the next episode as well, because G2E,
I think we're all out there.
The show is
very
going to
tasty.
bring a lot of trends and interesting information.
No, so that's absolutely very tasty. And I mean, I think, I can agree to that. So, obviously, Sigma being the next big, gambling event. All of us will be attending. I assume.
Reconvene.
And obviously, ID Now has a stand there as well. So, if you want to catch up with, with us, talk all things, regulation, gambling, whatever you like to talk, please come and see us.
Let's get a few friends along. Let's
get
a few different voices. It'd be great. It'd be great
indeed.
To talk
And obviously, maybe work towards having a podcast in Malta as well. So maybe have a bigger group. And obviously, would be great. For obviously our interest as well to maybe have someone from a regulator here, which could be quite It would be
interesting to see what they say.
Indeed.
Let's not start with, is regulation fit for purpose? You might want to start with something else.
No, we might be. It might be a little bit friendly, but look, listen. As I said, thoroughly enjoyed it today. It's been great having you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thoroughly enjoyed it today. You can catch me on @RogerIDNow on Twitter, or just Roger Tijik. I know the last name is very complicated, but on LinkedIn, just send me a message, get in touch. Please subscribe to the podcast. We hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed it as we have, and see you next time.